Let's look today at this beautiful book by John Boynton Priestley in the series that was called Essays of Today and Yesterday. He was one of the contributors to this series. If we look here, the others were Philip Gedaya, James Agate, Basil MacDonald Hastings, Barry Payne, Alice Meynell, David Grayson, Alan Monkhouse, A.C. Benson, Andrew Lang, Arnold Bennett, A.G. Gardner, Hilaire Belloc, C.E. Montague, Augustine Birrell. Here we have J.B. Priestley, Stacey Aumonier, and Edward Thomas. I must try and get hold of the Edward Thomas book because I have many original volumes of his work, but I don't think, in fact, no, I'm sure I don't have his contribution to this series called Essays of Today and Yesterday. But this is a beautiful book. I've had it a long time. Look at that. It looks like somebody paid £3 for it long before I did. But Essays of Today and Yesterday, J.B. Priestley, published by George G. Harrap & Co. Limited, London, Calcutta and Sydney. First published 1926, so that is from 1926. So as of today, we're looking at a book that is 95 years old and is in superb condition. I'm very happy with this, and I've long enjoyed the essays within it, and that's why I'm going to share some of those with you. Introductory note. The essayists, if we are to take them at their own valuation and neglect the amount of their accomplishment, are idle fellows indeed. Stevenson, you will remember, made the classic apology for the idler. The genial Alpha of the Plough confesses openly that he is a very lazy person, though he admits that he does not expect to be believed. And so with most of the others. They protest too much, however. The sum of their achievements shows that, as a rule, they are prosaically industrious men, such as Samuel Smiles might have venerated, other than the romantic vagabonds they would have us think them. And here is Mr. J.B. Priestley singing loudly the delights of doing nothing, delights to which he can have helped himself but sparingly. For in an incredibly short space of time he has done work which for quality and quantity might well move many of his elder brethren to envy. Add to 3 books of essays and some volumes of sound criticism, anthologies that give evidence of wide reading and singularly correct judgment, and you have not yet caught up with him. While you are in the very act of reckoning, there comes from the press an illuminating study of George Meredith, one of the latest additions to the notable English Men of Letters series. There is, too, the promise of a volume on talking by him, destined to form one of a promising new series, These Diversions, to be issued under his editorship. No mean achievement, this for a man who was born no longer ago than 1894. But as Mr. Arthur Waugh says, our author displays by instinct the qualities which other men develop through the toil and tribulation of years. Thanks are due to Messrs. Bowes and Bowes for permission to reprint A Mad Shepherd, on cartomancy, on being kind to the old, and A Road to Oneself from Papers from Lilliput, and to Messrs. John Lane, The Bodley Head Limited, for this insubstantial pageant, The Prophets, and A Beetonian Reverie from I for One, F.H.P. And so we're going to be looking through and reading through these particular essays, and we're going to start with the first one, A Mad Shepherd. The world is at once saner and yet more given to lunacy than it used to be. For the people outside asylums are saner than their grandfathers were. Yet there are greater numbers under some sort of treatment, or at least under lock and key, for madness. I do not know whether it is because there is an increasing harbingage for lunatics in our time, or because it is merely becoming more difficult every year in the face of specialists whose own sanity is never questioned, to prove that one is not yet ready for the madhouse. But it is clear that the eccentrics and half-wits who chuckled and grimaced in our older literature through the long tales of our grandparents are fast disappearing. A host of notable figures in Shakespeare, from Hamlet to Petruchio, would not be suffered to walk abroad these days unless they piped in a lower key. It is a great pity that all crack-brained, whimsical fellows are leaving us. We need a little variety in our experience, in our experiments with existence, for there is a danger that we are all crazed and have only decided for unanimity that we are the Mad Hatters who will not suffer a March hare, and these others, extravagant but harmless, have their own visions of life, and we cannot prove them wrong, but can only point to the majority, a trick unworthy of us. These bold experimentalists, the crack-brained, are now so few and so precious that I travel with one eye open for them. For a man is as well, if not better, occupied collecting eccentric essays in life, as he is casting about for ancient coins or earthenware. Remote towns or villages make the most promising hunting grounds, and only a short time ago my search was well rewarded in a certain small market town. I had been in the place several days, and had come to know most of its prominent figures well by sight, when one fellow, whom I was always seeing, here, there, and everywhere, began to excite my curiosity. He was an oldish man, with a close-shaven, tanned face, and always dressed in gaiters and what seemed to be a long smock, with a curiously shaped cap of the same material as his smock pressed down upon his head. These and other particulars I noted with interest, but what intrigued me most was a long pole, roughly shaped like a shepherd's crook, which he always carries in his hand, and which seemed to be some implement of his trade. But what his trade was, I could not guess. I never saw him employed in any way, never caught him piloting beasts toward the market, or making any kind of use of the mysterious pole. And yet, whenever I ran across him, which I did frequently, he always seemed to be fully occupied, neither rushing heedlessly nor yet loitering, but resolutely pressing forward to some important piece of business, a sober man of affairs. Even in a little market town there are many ways of earning bread and beer that fall outside the scope of a stranger's knowledge, tiny trades that are commonplaces in one shire and unknown in the next, and I might easily have contented myself with assuming that my man was thus engaged. But the archaic costume and the quaintly fashioned pole, now so familiar, were too provocative and led me to question my landlady, whose talk was fluent and full of good manner, though rather obscure. I had scarcely begun my description of the man before she had snatched the subject from me and panted forth the whole tale. In spite of his quaint figure, I had set my man down as a sober, busy citizen engaged in some obscure little trade of his own. He was nothing of the kind. He was even more fantastic than his clothes, more mysterious than his own strange implement. For it appeared that this fellow was nothing more nor less than a crack-brained idler, who had, in my landlady's words, gone soft in the head. Up to a few years ago, a lonely, quiet man, expecting nothing from the world, he had suddenly come into a fortune, and the surprise and joy that followed this stroke of luck had turned his brain. Thenceforward he blossomed madly and rang to amazing whims and crotchets, harmless enough, but strangely odd and diverting. His greatest and most delectable fantasy was this, that he took upon himself from time to time the duty of acting in a definite character, usually one of the ancient trades of the world. He would dress himself for the part, and so, as far as it was possible, take over the habits, the interests, the mode of speech of the particular type he copied. Thus he would be a sailor for some time, then a fisherman, and after that maybe a gamekeeper or forester, always dressing himself accordingly and keeping strictly to the type, and not declining to the actual indistinguishable characters of our own day, but presenting in his attire, as it were, the ideal sailor or forester, and so, tricked out in such homely yet symbolic vestments, perhaps thinking to take a place with the poet in the calm and proud procession of eternal things. When I saw him, he was a shepherd. Indeed, a shepherd appeared to be his favourite character, for he had maintained the part for some time, and, according to report, showed no signs of changing. There are few shepherds in that part of the country, and the few there are do not wear smocks or carry a crook as he did. But he followed his usual practice, looked back to a simpler, smaller, and more clearly defined word. and dressed the part to mark it off from all other trades. It was the least he could do, seeing that he did no actual work and devoted all his energies to the masquerade. His apparent busyness was all moonshine. The sheep he herded could not be driven in any mart in this world, for they were nothing but drifting phantoms. When he walked the sunlit streets, his grotesque shadow pursued by laughter, he hurried to mythical appointments, moved in shadowy markets, and trafficked in thin air. At the end of the day, after being urged here and there by his lively fancy, doubtless he returned home as tired and as well content with his day's insubstantial labour as any sober man of business. Sometimes maybe he would return elated, at others mortified, for there must be triumphs and grievous losses even in this matter of phantoms. And then in the evening, his crook laid aside, perhaps he would make his plans for the next day. But what such plans could be, no man can imagine, for they must be dreams within a dream and shadows of a shadow. So he would pass his time, hurting no man, his life, like that of all such quaint fellows, only marred by loneliness. Nor would he lack a companion, supposing his present whimsy holds, if I had my way, for somewhere in a large and dirty city there is a sheepdog that I once knew, a dog that had never known the life it was meant to lead, never seen the hills with the sheep scattered upon them, and yet in the yard of a warehouse it spent its days herding invisible sheep, running round bales, and barking furiously at barrels. Were that dog mine, the crazy shepherd should have him, so that the two might walk the streets together, happily pursuing their mythical flocks and otherwise busying themselves in their dream pastures. The maggots of the brain are not to be enumerated and labelled. What led this harmless fellow to such fantasies, no man can know. Perhaps after the sudden stroke of fortune sent his wits wandering, he had been mastered by some old thought, some half-forgotten protest against the drab formlessness of labour in our day, against the absence of any marks of distinction between men of one trade and men of another. He had reverted to a more ordered, clear-cut time, when every man was stamped with the sign of one or other of the ancient industries. Only in some such way can one attempt to explain this strange masquerade of his. He has his own vision of life, his own idea of that poetry which transfigures the mechanism of blood and bone. And I trust that he will be left to himself to go his own way, for when he is weary of a shepherd's life, there are still many time-old tradesmen, from tinker to tailor, that he can impersonate. Nor will it be long before I see him again, caring little whether he is still a shepherd or metamorphosed into a fisherman or cobbler, so long as he is still with us, going his own fantastic gait. A Mad Shepherd, from Papers from Lilliput. J.B. Priestley.